Hey, you found us. Welcome to the First and Long College Football Show. We're going to get to the prediction that you clicked on here in just a second. But first, I want you to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button. And do not forget to leave a comment in the comment section and tell us your prediction for the score of this game. And we invite you to come join us. We talk college football multiple times a week in the live format and video uploads, all types of content. So you got to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. That way you know whenever we've got content coming your way. Hope you enjoy the video. Thank you so much. 3:30 on Fox, Utah at Washington. Washington is an 8.5-point favorite, over under 54.5. So Washington just came off of, I guess you would call it a big win over a struggling USC team. That's kind of like an oxymoron there, a big win over a struggling team. But nonetheless, for Washington beating USC, it's always a big win there. Michael Penix looks like he's getting back right. Utah scores 55 points last week. Defense is what it is. We know what the defense is going to be for this Kyle Whittingham team in Utah. Is Utah going to be able to limit these wide receivers of Washington? That's really going to be what the question's all about here. And the answer, I think, is going to be yes and no. Are they going to be able to limit them to less than 50 whatever points they scored last week? Was it 52? Yes. And Washington will not 55. Score 52 points in this game. But Utah's not going to be able to keep up with Washington either. So this is a weird number, though, at 8.5. What's your thoughts on this game, and what are your kind of numbers you're looking at for this one? Washington don't run the football a ton, and Utah's really good at stopping the run. So I feel like that's a really good stat that's wasted for Utah on their side. What's your thoughts on this one?
It's a weird one to predict. Honestly, Washington has been really up and down. They've had 2 games this year where they didn't score a single offensive touchdown. You see Quentin there picking Utah to win outright. I like the pick. I'm staying away from this from a betting perspective, but let me show you kind of what I'm seeing here. So Utah, they're coming off of an impressive win over an Arizona State team that had been playing some really good football. Their offense put up 55 points in that game. First time they've scored over 40 all season long, and I think that there's a reason for that. I think that Barnes is playing really well, and the pig farmer. That's right. And he's kind of like the Brock Purdy of college football, I feel like. But yeah, so he's playing really good football, and I think that Utah is kind of starting to figure him out as much as he's starting to figure out the offensive scheme of Utah. And it stinks that we didn't get to see Barnes as the starting quarterback all offseason, playing in this offense and already being a part of this system. We would have seen a much better offense undoubtedly coming out of Utah. But the beauty in that is that we're getting to see it unfold mid-season, and I think that it's showing right now, and look, Arizona State is a get right team for any offense. I think that next year Arizona State will be much better. This year defensively, they're not good. I mean, I don't want to take too much away from 55 points being scored on Arizona State, but Utah scored 55 points, and I think that needs to be the takeaway. That's something they haven't done all season against anybody, let alone a Pac-12 team. On the other hand, Washington just made Caleb Williams cry by taking him out of the Heisman race and taking USC further out of the Pac-12 race. That they seemingly were never in the first place. Now, it seems like a distant memory that USC was a part of the or a part of the Pac-12 hunt there. And they beat USC, you mentioned it, 52-42, and showed just enough ability on defense to force USC to give the ball back on just a couple of drives, and that was really the difference in this game. It really felt like one of those games where whoever had the ball last would win. And, I think that it kind of played out that way, but, Washington was able to get a couple of stops there, and that was really the difference. So this game coming up against Utah and Washington is going to be a very different game from the game that Washington played last week. Utah, they're going to get their stops. and on defense to keep them in this game. They gave up 32 to USC and 35 to Oregon, two similarly proficient offenses as Washington. They're a lot like Washington, in other words. So the question becomes, can Utah score about 36 points on an kind of uncharacteristically bad Washington defense this year? And I think to answer that, you have to look at the USC defense, who is really not that much worse than Washington's. In Utah's game against USC, the Utes, as I mentioned, scored 32 points. And with Utah coming off of its best offensive outing of the season, I think that answer is very much yes. They need to find some turnovers or special teams plays, but I think that Utah is very much a threat to Washington in this game after Washington played, and I know that we're looking at USC as not a very good team, but I guarantee you Washington was up for that game against USC all week. I don't want to call it an emotional win, but they wanted to beat USC and got the win. Maybe this is kind of a letdown spot for Washington, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. But for Washington to win the game, I think they're going to need to score at least 40 points. If they get to 40, I think they're good. I don't think that Utah is going to score 40 in this game. And that's something that they didn't do against Arizona. They didn't do that against Oregon. And they didn't do that against Arizona State. The team that I mentioned has a really bad defense. So it's very possible for Utah to win this game. They should be able to get to 40 with Penix, Odunze, Polk, and maybe McMillan. He was out last week. I don't think that they're clear on his timetable yet to return. But Penix will have to play their great game as Utah really has had more interceptions and they've given up touchdowns through the air. So that's an interesting stat. I think they've had 9 interceptions and given up 7 passing touchdowns, if I'm not mistaken. So beware, when you're chucking that ball down deep. Gosh, I have flipped on this freaking prediction, Mark. Man, I wrote down Utah 33, Washington 41. I have a sneaky suspicion that Utah is going to be able to pull this one out. If Utah wins, I think it's going to be like a 27-31 type game in Utah's favor. I think I'm going to stick with that bet. I'm going to change my notes here for my record, but I'm going to go Utah 31 and Washington 27 in this game.
Yeah, well, part of the reason that I think the Washington was so successful last week is that they were able to run the football. Dylan Johnson, who is a transfer from Mississippi State, somebody that we've watched throughout the year, he's had a couple good games, and those couple games that he had that were good, Oregon and then USC, this offense rolled. And honestly, that's a common trend among all college football teams. This isn't some kind of groundbreaking news. If you can run the football, you can do other things, right? And that is not a strength of this Washington team. They are not a good running football team. The interior of that offensive line is just not great. It's not great. They've lost some players along the way. Pretty much the middle 3 guys of that offensive line, center and the 2 guards, have been replaced. I believe the center's a freshman. So while they've done okay, obviously they're undefeated. While they've done okay with those replacing those guys, this is the time of year where the depth really starts to show. And they're going up against a very physical Utah defensive line. They're physical every year. It's a Kyle Whittingham team. That's just what they do. They breed physicality in that football program. I think Utah limits the run game enough to make Washington force them into obvious passing downs. If Washington's not able to stay ahead of the chains in a game like this against a well-balanced team like Utah, I think it does spell trouble for Washington. We've seen Washington, like you talked about, that Arizona State game. They didn't even score an offensive touchdown. So we've seen much more inferior defenses hold this Washington team down lower than they're comfortable with. And I think you're right. If Washington can get to 40 in this game, that would be the equivalent of running and hiding with it. Because I don't see this Utah team being able to score 40 barring multiple turnovers like pick sixes fumble recoveries for touchdowns, something like that. So key to the game for Utah here, I think, is limit the run. And if you can get a turnover or two, because we know Washington is going to throw the football. We know that's the case. If you can sit back and drop in a zone and confuse Penix in some way, then and get a turnover out of that or two, then I think that Utah is going to be in really good shape. But I'm going to take Utah plus 8.5 as it sits right now. We'll see how I feel about it on Friday on the betting show. May change my mind, but right now I like Utah on that plus 8.5, as I think they can limit that Washington run game and hamper this offense enough to be able to score on what I think is just a tired defense. I think they're just wore out. I don't think they're super deep. And we're, like I said, we're getting into the end of the year here, and it's gut check time. Look,